Loves. As most of you know, Western North Carolina was impacted by a big hurricane in late September. Highly impacted my home, and I lost my studio as well. And while I was going through this experience, I started to have very similar things happen in my body and in my brain that I did when I was undergoing betrayal trauma. And while at the time it felt really weird to be comparing the two together, because they're not the same, there were a lot of surprising similarities in how the brain and the nervous system and the body tends to compensate for these very traumatic experiences. I couldn't help but compare and contrast the experiences of these two life events, and I thought it would be an interesting thing to write and to share about. But this is just my own inner experience, my own musings on how reality was shifting, or the things that I was feeling that were the same, and then some that I noticed were very different. So the similarities that I encountered were, the first one was that the damage was very extensive. I definitely experienced full-blown adrenal shock and fatigue. So I had the overload, the hypervigilance, the inability to sleep. There was a period of overfunctioning, of overthinking, and followed by a period of extreme adrenal fatigue. And that's where nothing functions. You are tired, you're wanting to sleep all the time, the brain goes numb, you just don't have any energy for anything. So that was samesies. In both cases, there was a loss of stability, of extreme life change, and being faced with a complete unknown, being totally uprooted, and having the direction I was going in life being totally sideswiped, or let the feeling of having your feet kicked out from underneath me, and just looking off the edge into who knows what's next. Both of those experiences were probably the most extreme events as far as having no idea what was going to happen next. So with both events, I experienced a severe loss of cognitive function. There it goes. So after this disaster, a lot of people were reporting what they were calling hurricane brain. So it was like short-term memory, problem solving became disabled. It was like trying to find the words for a specific thing, or creating sentences, like even language or speaking. Like I have been struggling with that more, like making eye contact with people and just having the brain run as a smooth operating system like you're used to. That became severely debilitated, and we're getting there. I'm not like 100% in the clear from that experience yet, but I will say the same thing happened long ago when I went through that betrayal trauma. The shock on the brain is a really intense thing, and it's really scary to feel like your mental capacity has evaded you or run away. It is a symptom of a huge trauma, and over time that will be restored with a lot of rest and a lot of sleep. But oh my God, yeah, both times it was just like I felt very beside myself, and my cognitive function was severely impaired. Grief, both times, immense grief. There was a lot of sadness, a lot of anger, a lot of disbelief, a lot of loss, a lot of fear, a lot of that internal bargaining and going through. They say that there are cycles of grief, but I wouldn't say in my experience that it's actually, like a cycle. You go through one step and like all 5 of them, and then you're done. Like it's more like you go through one and then the other, and then back to this one and then back to that one, and just kind of bounce around between all of them. And then you come into acceptance, and then another layer might hit, and you might remember something and, feel really sad about that all over again and then get really pissed off about it and so on and so forth. So I definitely found myself in the pinball machine of grief getting tossed around in both of these circumstances. The other similarity I experienced was that, once out of the immediate threat and once I was able to relax my nervous system and was in a safe place, I had emotions begin to emerge. And the differences, one was very internal. Experiencing narcissistic abuse and betrayal trauma was a very internal experience. Like I was very much alone in it, and experiencing the hurricane and the earthquake was very external. It was like everything around me. It was very physical. It was obvious, and yeah, it was outside of my body. Versus the other one was, is like my inner world. And that said, the type of trauma and the visibility of it was a lot different. So in a natural disaster, it's very visible. You can see it, you can smell it, I wouldn't taste it, but you could. You can touch it. It's very tangible. The damages and the loss that takes place in that circumstance versus, when you go through betrayal trauma, that's a very internal experience. So it's very invisible. Like you can't see it or no one else can see it. You can. But yeah, it's undetectable to the eye and the rest of the senses. Another difference is how people respond to victims of these different circumstances. So, people tend to be a lot more willing to believe you and a lot more supportive and comforting if you've been a victim of a natural disaster versus, if you have undergone a betrayal trauma or have undergone, a psychological abuse, people are a lot less likely to believe you. People tend to be a lot less supportive. So I will say there's a much greater level of compassion that people seem to be willing to offer to victims of natural disasters versus, victims of domestic abuse or betrayal traumas. And to elaborate on that, in a natural disaster, people will encourage you to take it easy on yourself. They will provide financial support and say, hey, if you need anything, I'm here. Like they'll offer housing or, a lot of there's grant funding for this when your life falls out from underneath you. There is catastrophe funding. There's federal aid money. People come together and really support each other through situations like this. So you do feel deeply supported by the community. Also, and this is a big one, people don't tend to shame you for feeling like a victim. They don't tell you to try to get over it right away. And they don't look down on you for being disempowered or experiencing great loss for being in a natural disaster. On the other hand, people tend to tell victims of betrayal trauma or abuse to get over it quickly. There's a lot of victim shaming. There is, people hear it all the time, like, well, why didn't you leave? Well, you must have done something to deserve the abuse. You created this, you manifested it, you chose this person. So there's a lot of personal responsibility for experiencing that kind of trauma that gets placed on the victim in those kinds of experiences. And people often don't actually believe how bad it was. I mean, there's no photographs, there's no videos, there's no news stories, and even if you were to be able to create your own, there aren't any other people sharing similar content or experiences out there, so you really are left alone in that, and usually victims of these kinds of traumas are not believed. And that's another difference. When you go through betrayal trauma, you're very much alone, whereas in a natural disaster, the whole community is going through it with you. And that can actually bring people together You feel more connected with the community of people who are undergoing the same thing and they're problem solving together. However, in a betrayal trauma, it's usually a very isolating experience because no one around you is able to empathize because they're usually in a completely different world. And there's even a difference in how a person is believed. Like when the disaster is on the news, people tend to believe that is real, and when it's obviously something that cannot be televised, people question it. And normally that's why a lot of victims go, like not believed, and they end up stuck in that isolation because there is no way to prove it. Another noticeable difference is that surviving a natural disaster doesn't actually undermine your belief and trust in humanity and human beings. So on some level, like our most primal level, we expect and we anticipate nature to do some really scary, life-threatening stuff. Even in places where it doesn't usually happen. Like we don't really get hurricanes in the Appalachian Mountains, but it happened and it was very intense. However, we all know that nature can be very unpredictable, and it's also not a personal thing. It just happens. And so when something like that goes down, I mean, yeah, like looking at a river can be very different. And so that's a similar thing. It's like, well, it doesn't change your perception and the predictability or unpredictability of humans. However, now, looking at a river, it's like, okay, like I know what that can turn into in the time frame of 20 minutes, and it's extremely terrifying. However, I will say, like, now I'm living right above a river again, and in the beginning there was definitely PTSD. I was freaked out, but that has already completely subsided. I do have it in the back of my brain, like I know what could happen, where previously that wasn't in my immediate awareness. However, recovering from a betrayal trauma will, it drastically affects the way that you view human beings in general, especially because these traumas happen at the hands of those who claim to love you the most. They're the people that are closest to you. They're the people that you have entrusted your life and your everyday and your deepest secrets and like so much with. And, when someone who's that close to you completely turns on you and betrays you, it really rips out your ability to trust in humanity in general. Because the brain says, well, if this person who claims to love me more than anyone else could do something like that, well, then, what's to say that every single other person on the planet who doesn't claim to love me like that, like what's keeping them from doing a similar thing, if not worse? And generally, we do not expect the people that we love and trust to do unpredictable, scary, and life-threatening things. Nature, sure, yeah, that can happen. The people that we love, like, whoa, yeah, that's a whole nother experience. And in my opinion, it is a whole lot worse. And finally, gaslighting. So I was putting this initially as a difference, but this can be a similarity as well, come to find out. So, initially when I was writing these, comparisons down, I was noting how it's a lot harder for people to gaslight you when you're in a natural disaster because, well, duh, you've got video representation of it, you've got photo representation of it, a lot of other people saw it. Like, you keep driving down the same streets all the time and seeing the same destruction all the time. Like, it is there. It's in your face. It's very obvious. With betrayal trauma, like, you're visiting it every day inside of yourself, but the people around you, like, you don't look any different. You just look a little crazy. You look unhinged. You look like you need help. You look like there is something wrong with you, because there is, like having that experience can actually drive us crazy and make us feel terrible and do a lot of damage internally. And so it's really easy to blame the victim of that kind of experience based on the outside looks. And usually the perpetrators of betrayal trauma or narcissists, the thing that they're the best at is creating a persona. They create this false identity. Like their charisma is how they get by. That is like their main alibi, is how like calmly and collectively and dishonestly they can conduct themselves after committing a big betrayal. There's a charm and a way of certain people to be able to get their point across because it's false. So they really have to sugar dip it. And when you're looking at a natural disaster, there's none of that. It's just like in your face, undeniable. Well, come to find out, you can actually gaslight people who have been in a natural disaster. And I was really surprised to see how often this was occurring. I had a lot of friends and, people who I would meet just in general, we would talk about stuff. And then, they would share their accounts and stories. And then other groups would, like, it mostly happened online on the social media front. People tended to not really do this in person. Social media is its own Pandora's box, as we know. But I was really surprised to see people discredit others, personally made videos, their own stories, the stories that they heard from their friends or their community members, calling it misinformation, discounting the amount of people who, had witnessed fatalities, and saying that they were, fear-mongering, and all sorts of really intense stuff. And, when when I saw that going on in my own community, it made me really sad and was actually, it felt like a secondary trauma, right? Because it really reminded me of my own experience of having such a brutal thing happen, and then having people be cruel in the midst of it, and saying like, what, that didn't happen, that couldn't happen. And granted, the people who were closest to me, who knew me the most, like didn't engage in that. It was just more, less the flying monkeys, people who were outside of my sphere. Most of the people who know me well, especially the people, in my community here who had seen that behavior from that particular person before, like they got it, they stood with me, and shared their experiences that were further validating of my own, which is very helpful. And I think that's maybe why I was surprised to see the gaslighting from people's natural disaster experiences. So yeah, I guess like similarity, difference, it depends on who you talk to and who you engage in. But so I guess it's ultimately a similarity. Like there's gaslighting possible. However, it's probably just not as common when, like the rubble and the destruction is in your face every day. So there's really not a point to this video. It's just more of an observation. My brain really likes to do a lot of pattern tracking. When my body and my nervous system went through this huge shock and displacement in life and complete, pattern interrupt of a disastrous nature, it was surprising to me how similar a lot of these physical and psychological symptoms were. I was like, wow, okay, I haven't experienced this since, back then. And in a way it was kind of helpful because, I'm making these videos and helping, you all understand and move through betrayal trauma and narcissistic abuse. And, one of the things that I do really want to share is that you can get to a place of being healed into where that's just a distant memory. and you will get there. And I want to encourage you that you'll get there. And it was fascinating that having this hurricane and all of this flooding happen, to kind of physically and psychologically brought me back into a very similar state as I was back then. And it allowed me to reflect on that a lot more. And also allowed me to reflect on, like, okay, some of these things are very similar to that experience, and then some of these things are different. So that's what this video is all about. And I hope you found this amusing in some sort of regard. And yeah, sending my love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.